Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, back with another reaction video today. We're gonna react to why the Boondocks was better than you remember. A chill perspective, retrospective. My bad. Anyway, so let's get right into this. Ooh, I'm tired. Can't read. I said perspective instead of retrospective. Fuck is going on here, man?
To most people who have never
content,
seen Boondocks, it probably just comes off as a typical black comedy. And I don't mean black comedy like Fight Club or Shaun of the Dead. I mean black comedy like Friday or the PJs. Holy shit, remember the PJs?
Yeah.
Probably not. And at first glance, I don't blame anyone for thinking that all they'd get out of
watching
watching
Boondocks
is some cheap jokes about black stereotypes and terrible bling rap era music blasting in the background. That was kind of par for the course when it came to black entertainment in that era. And I find that a lot of people think that race is the only factor in the Boondocks' comedy, and while I wouldn't disagree that racial humor is a large part of its jokes, there's also several other hilarious jokes and scenes that have basically nothing to do with race at all. And that's just one of the reasons I love the Boondocks so much. There is just so much more under the surface than what it originally appears to be. Like most shows, the tone, presentation, and overall quality of the Boondocks varies from season to season. Season 2 was arguably the funniest season of them all, with many of the show's most iconic memes and references coming from that season. Season 3 is a little hit and miss for me, but it also has a handful of the show's best episodes among its ranks. And Season 4 is a complete dumpster fire that should have never existed in the first place. But there's something about Season 1 that always stood out above the others. I've been watching the episodes from Season 1 since they were released almost 20 years ago, and despite how many times I've seen them, I pretty much never get tired of watching them.
Yep.
Comedy tends to get old after a while, but when it's mixed with great storytelling and compelling character moments, it helps to keep those jokes fresh for much longer than usual. The Boondocks is one of the best examples of this that I can think of. Even though every episode in Season 1 is not directly connected, they all serve to paint a grander picture of not only the characters depicted, but the world and universe that they operate in as well. Throughout the 15 episodes of Season 1, every major character is given their moment to shine and have their personality, their worldview, their flaws, their desires, and their failures depicted in hilarious, endearing, and memorable ways. Where most comedies create characters to be cheap one-note jokes or parodies, the Boondocks manages to create satirical characters that still feel like real people. For the most part. The first episode of the Boondocks is titled The Garden Party, and it opens with the main character of the show, Huey, explaining through narration that he is not a prophet, but he sometimes has prophetic dreams.
Announcement to make. Jesus was black, Ronald Reagan was the devil, and the government is lying about 9/11. Thank you for your time and good night.
This opening scene serves as a perfect introduction to the show and everything that it's about. It's deceptively calm, utterly hilarious, unpredictably outrageous, and behind all of that, it's attempting to speak about forbidden truths, or at least what the writers believe are forbidden truths. If a main character is supposed to be a reflection or an embodiment of the main themes and messages of a series, then Huey Freeman is a damn near perfect main character for the Boondocks. Huey is, as he would put it, a black revolutionary freedom fighter. Huey is usually a very reserved and laid-back person, but like any anime protagonist, despite being a small child, he's always ready to throw hands with any grown-ass men who try to get in his way.
Right.
That little definitely has hands. Huey is a sensible, educated, and well-meaning person, unfortunately trapped in a corrupt and biased world full of morons and manipulative, power-hungry monsters. So, the regular world, I guess. Throughout Season 1, Huey constantly and passionately fights against the injustices that he encounters. Whether it's racism, classism, catching local murderers, uplifting the spirits of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., or even protecting Oprah Winfrey from would-be kidnappers. No matter what seemingly impossible task is put in front of him, Huey is always ready to fight for those who need him. And as admirable as that quality is, it's also exhausting and borderline masochistic.
Which is why he retired.
Enough fighting your own battles, so
I think by Season 3 he retired, didn't he?
Fighting other people's battles is guaranteed to be a somewhat miserable existence. Huey says it best himself.
The life of a black hero has never been for the meek of heart.
Despite his clear passion for justice and revolution, Huey is not shown to be a happy person. In fact, Huey never smiles throughout the entire series.
We the same.
Seriously, go back and watch it.
That's why I related to Huey more than anybody. I love Riley, but I related to Huey the most.
Comedy first, Huey's character serves as this constant and sobering reminder that underneath these jokes lies real pain and trauma that oppressed and marginalized people face every day in America and around the world. The first episode does a great job of setting up Huey's role in this narrative and his troubled mindset while being trapped in this rich, white paradise of suburbia.
I don't know. I don't want to move here, but I don't really want Granddad to lose his house. He worked his whole life to get here. Oh well, I shot a nigga.
The second episode of season 1 is about the trial of R. Kelly, who you may know from all of the classic music that he made in the 90s and 2000s.
Yep.
Unless you're one of the many women he sexually assaulted, then you probably know him better for other things. One thing that the writers of the Boondocks were amazing at were creating plots for episodes that were topical in the moment, yet also managed to stay topical years later. Whether this was dumb luck or just genius foresight, I'm not sure. But
probably genius
the fact
foresight.
That there was an infamous R. Kelly trial happening at the time of the writing of this episode, and then another infamous R. Kelly trial 15 years later is pretty amazing. And there's more instances like this where the Boondocks becomes a sort of Black Simpsons, where they're predicting the future of culture seemingly at will. But back to the episode, there are a ton of standout moments for me in this one. I mean, I'd argue that every scene is memorable for one reason or another. But I really love Huey's line at the end of the episode.
A lot of scenes in this show
of dealing with the most
kind of predicted the future
of the Black community, to the point where he actually cracks and goes on this epic rant venting his frustrations to an entire courtroom of R. Kelly supporters. Also, pour one out for the god Adam West.
Maybe R. Kelly did urinate on this woman, but America urinated on R. Kelly.
Episode 3 is called Guess Hoes Coming to Dinner, which is a clever little play on the Sidney Poitier film of a similar name. This episode follows Granddad's whirlwind romance with a, let's say, lady of the night. Her name is Cristal, like the champagne. On top of being fucking hilarious, this episode also serves as a great analysis of the dangers of becoming a simp that I definitely appreciate more as a
which is so prevalent now. Sad.
This feels like as good of a time as any to highlight the music in the Boondocks. The intro theme is a certified banger. That's not even to be discussed.
Not even
but
close.
It can't be understated how much of a pivotal role the background music plays in adding to the vibe and tone of the series. A majority of the music in season 1 consists of these soothing, wandering, and sometimes really solemn piano compositions that add to the peaceful suburban atmosphere that the show takes place in.
Yeah.
There's also this really good mix of smooth late 90s boom bap hip hop and soulful jazz and blues that really spice up scenes when they come in. But back to the episode. Beneath all of the comedy here, there's a pretty sad story from both sides of Granddad and Cristal's romance. Despite her beauty and all of the things that she's able to manipulate men into giving her, Cristal lives a very chaotic and uncertain life, and even though Granddad offers her a way out and a chance at a normal and safe life, she ultimately denies it, knowing that she's not the type of person who can be content with a steady job and home life. This leaves Granddad, a man who's terrified of spending his final years alone after living through about 3 lifetimes worth of Black American craziness, to face the reality that he may never find a woman who truly loves him. Which is what makes the ending scene of Granddad falling asleep in the kitchen, waiting for Cristal to come back, so sad to me. Oh yeah, pour one out for the god John Witherspoon.
R.I.P. to the homie though. R.I.P. to all our official, unofficial dads. our official, unofficial dad or granddad. R.I.P. man. R.I.P. R.I.P. to Pops, man. R.I.P. to John Witherspoon, man. R.I.P. man. Our official yet unofficial dad / granddad. Like, come on, man. Either he was Pops or he was granddad. Either way. We miss you, bruh. We miss you.
Episode 4 is another banger entitled Granddad's Fight. And wouldn't you know it, the entire episode is about Granddad fighting some old crazy blind dude. The old crazy blind dude in question is named Stink Meter. And this is the episode that introduces the concept of nigga moments, which are an all too real phenomenon of American black culture. As Huey explains,
You're about to experience a nigga moment. Webster defines a nigga moment as a moment when ignorance overwhelms the mind of an otherwise logical Negro male,
What did you
You
say,
say bitch, nigga? Hey, squeeze it, nigga.
causing him to act in an illogical, self-destructive manner, i.e.,
Like a nigga.
nigga moments derive from the inner hatred and negativity that many black men in America are conditioned to seal deep within themselves. Colonel Stinkmeaner is the physical embodiment of that hatred and negativity within the black community. He represents the dark cloud of violence that seems to follow black people everywhere we go, whether that be churches, grocery stores, nightclubs, even our own neighborhoods. It's a cloud that could cause lightning to strike us at any time for seemingly no good reason. There is no good reason for Stinkmeaner's actions, and there's no way to reason with him. The only thing he desires is the destruction of his enemies, and his enemies are anyone who happens to be in his way. But on a lighter note, this episode also introduces Granddad's New Shoes song, which is a melody he ends up singing several times throughout the show, and one that gets stuck in my head all the goddamn time.
New shoes, new shoes.
Boy, Nike makes some good shoes.
Episode 5 might be a top 5 episode of all time, and it's called The Health Inspector. There are a million reasons why this episode is so great, but the two most important to me are the introductions of Ed Wunsler III and Gin Rummy as a duo. Possibly my favorite side characters of any show ever. These two might be the most consistently funny characters in the entire series.
Cause Charlie Murphy and Samuel Jackson. What you expect?
What that mean? He talking about diplomacy. I don't do diplomacy. English motherfucker!
Fucker, do you speak it?
What the fuck y'all looking at? I don't care if it's mama to ass, grandmama, innocent bystanders, little kids, babysitters, bill collectors, whatever. I leave his whole block filled with hot brass if I have to. And you know why? Because I just
Don't give a fuck.
Go ahead, name a more iconic duo. Being a little kid when I first watched this show, I didn't even realize that they were supposed to be young, gangsta-ass versions of George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld. But now that I know that, it makes their already hilarious hijinks even more amazing to watch, especially since they're voiced by two of the blackest actors ever in Charlie Murphy and Samuel L. Jackson. It's also another reason why this scene at the gas station is the greatest Iraq War metaphor joke that you have ever seen.
fuck this shit. Whose side you on? Mine or this motherfucker who's obviously of terrorist descent?
Oh yeah, pour one out for the god Charlie.
Damn, dog. Come on, man. R.I.P. to Charlie Murphy, man. R.I.P. man. R.I.P. Charlie Murphy, man. And I'm gonna miss that, man. R.I.P. to Charlie Murphy, man. Damn, dog. Damn.
Charlie Murphy. Episode 6 is called The Real, and despite being about reality television, this episode feels more surreal than any other point in the series. The quick synopsis is that Riley coaxes Granddad into lying about his health and occupation to gain access to a bunch of increasingly extravagant reality TV shows in order to get, what else but fame, women, and money. All of this happens while Huey is being spied on by a secret agent he calls White Shadow. Just like a typical reality show of that era, the characters give confessionals throughout the episode about the events that are transpiring. Riley and Granddad's are pretty hilarious and par for the course for their characters, but it's Huey's that are the most interesting to me. His final confessional was especially interesting as it takes place after he had spent an entire episode trying to warn Riley and Granddad about the folly of their ways, just to be ignored and disregarded until their plans fell apart as he said they would. I mentioned earlier when discussing Huey as a character that a life spent trying to be a hero is a pretty masochistic and miserable one, and this episode is a great example of the pitfalls that come with trying to fix things that are out of your control. And that's why I love the White Shadow's final remarks to Huey before he leaves.
I know you want to save the world, Huey, but sometimes people have to learn lessons on their own. the
Yup.
hard way.
Yup.
Well, can't miss the idol. If you ever want to talk, remember, I'm always listening.
Episode 7 is titled The Story of Gangstalicious, and it deals with rappers who pretend to be something they're not for the sake of profiting off of an image that's popular. Remember when I said that these episodes manage to always stay relevant? This is another one of those.
Yup.
Gangstalicious is Riley's favorite rapper, and if you watch even a few of the episodes of the first season, you'll most likely hear his song Thuggin' Love playing in the background during various scenes. After Gangstalicious gets shot, again, Riley takes it upon himself to go to the hospital to protect Gangstalicious himself. Once at the hospital, Riley and Gangstalicious are taken captive by the shooters, and while being driven to what they believe is their graves, Gangstalicious comes clean to Riley about lying about the lavish and also deadly lifestyle that he appeared to lead. And, I just realized I haven't really talked about Riley yet, have I? Well, in his own words, Riley would probably describe himself as a real nigga. And that brings with it every positive and negative connotation you can think of. Riley is brash, bold, loud, outspoken, crass, strong-willed, determined, stubborn, selfish, self-sustaining, violent, tough, annoying, prideful, and lovable as f***. While Huey is the stoic core of the show, Riley is his wild and brazen foil. Or in Samurai Champloo terms, Huey is the gene of the show and Riley is the Mugen. Riley tends to cause more issues than he ends up solving, and even though he starts the series as a seemingly one-note antithesis to Huey, more depth to his character is shown throughout the first season, and it starts with this episode. Episode 8 is the obligatory Christmas episode, and surprise, surprise,
Dear
it's another
Santa,
banger.
you's a
Huey is hired
bitch.
to make a realistic Christmas play about the life of Black Jesus, or Jesus. Riley is hunting down mall Santas with a BB gun and golf clubs, and their friend Jasmine just wants everyone to share in the joy of Christmas. It's a great special episode that delves into the struggle that many artists face in maintaining their creative freedom and integrity within an industry that is designed to kill that creativity for the sake of financial gain and appeasement of the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
This episode also shows that even someone as overtly cynical as Huey or Riley deep down just want to be happy and believe in childish things like Santa Claus and Christmas miracles. More on that later. There's also some pretty touching moments in this. Hell, even Uncle Ruckus has a touching moment with Jasmine in the end. And trust me, I know I haven't talked about Ruckus yet. More on him later too. Episode 9 is one of the more interesting episodes. The Boondocks already takes place in a fictional and satirical world, so it's all the more intriguing that this episode is just a work of Huey's imagination instead of being something that actually happens in the series. Huey dreams of a world in which Martin Luther King Jr. never died from his assassination attempt in the 60s, but instead went into a 30-year coma and awoke in the 21st century. After a few years spent in modern times, MLK finally realizes that the world he knew was long gone, and despite all of his work for civil rights, Black people are now free from the legal oppression brought about by Jim Crow and segregation, but seem to be in an entirely different predicament. He also basically gets canceled for what would 100% be his viewpoint on 9/11 if he lived to see it, and the idea of people turning on MLK is hilarious to me, because it definitely could happen in today's day and age.
Pretty much.
After seeing the state of the Black community, MLK gives an impassioned speech at the end of the episode that's very reminiscent of Huey's speech from the R. Kelly episode. The difference this time is that after the speech, the world actually listens to MLK, and in Huey's words, the revolution finally happened. I think the ending of this episode answers why the writers made it a dream instead of reality, because Huey's ideal world is not one in which everything is nice and peaceful, but one where his voice actually matters. He knows what he believes is right, but he gets shut down and ignored so much that it feels like he'd have to be the ghost of Martin Luther King Jr. for his opinions to be considered. And that, once again, is a sobering reminder of the real world. Episode 10 is one that I tend to forget about, but one I always love to rewatch when I remember it. It's called The Itis, and it's an entire episode about the unhealthy and destructive eating habits that come with Black culture. There's also some great messages about the destructive nature of urban development being used as a tool to fatten the pockets of white landowners, but that's a little too much to get into for this video, and it's already very long as it is. I actually don't have much to say about this episode other than that. Despite it not being very deep in terms of character development, it's a pretty solid episode. Oh, and Ed Asner as Ed Wuncler Sr. is hilarious and probably the most underrated character in the entire show.
It really
Would
is.
you like to sign our petition
To the fourth
for
season.
humane treatment for immigrant workers? If you don't get that bullshit out of
My
my
face.
bitch.
And also, pour one out for the god Ed Asner. Damn, a lot of people who are in the show are dead now. Episode 11 is called Let's Nab Oprah, and it's a very welcomed return of Ed and Rummy as a duo. Well, Riley being with them makes him a trio, but you get my point. After a string of hilariously frustrating robbery hookups, the trio decide that they need a big score to knock them out of their funk. They brilliantly decide to, you guessed it, kidnap talk show legend Oprah Winfrey.
Fuck Oprah. Fuck that
episode of the
bitch.
show. Huey eventually catches on to this plan and tries to stop them. Besides Ed and Rummy, my favorite aspect of this episode is the brotherly dynamic shown between Huey and Riley. We finally see them fight each other both physically and mentally in this episode. Both of them are scheming against each other and trying to guess the other's next move before they make it. It's both funny and oddly heartwarming watching such an over-the-top depiction of a toxic big brother-little brother relationship. Great episode all around. Episode 12 is another one of my favorites, and it's titled Riley Was Here.
Yep.
In this episode, we learn that Riley is actually quite the young artist. Unfortunately for everyone in Woodcrest, he decides to show that artistic talent through putting graffiti on all of their houses. One night out, while defacing other people's property, Riley meets a white man with a big afro and a very soothing voice who is definitely not supposed to be famous white painter Bob Ross. The not Bob Ross white man helps Riley improve one of his murals, but when Riley gets caught by the cops, Granddad forces him to take art classes as a better outlet for his artistic creativity. Plot twist, Riley learns that his new art teacher is the same laid-back white man from the night he got caught by the police. After some initial reluctance on Riley's part, the art teacher eventually convinces Riley to start doing graffiti around the neighborhood again, but this time with a more mature and refined artistic style. Funny enough, after Riley does this, the people of Woodcrest are actually appreciative of the graffiti and become fans of the artist. The only problem is that no one will believe that it's Riley no matter how much he swears it was him. Even his grandfather refuses to believe that Riley has the talent to be a truly great painter.
Damn.
Riley is then forced to paint something that only he could paint, something so personal that it would prove to his grandfather that he was the artist all along. So, in one of my favorite moments in the entire series, Riley finds a picture of his deceased parents on their wedding day, and with the help of his art teacher, they paint a giant mural of Riley's parents on the front of Granddad's fancy new home. And when Granddad walks outside the next morning, he's brought to tears by the beautiful image that his grandson left for him. And this whole sequence is done to the tune of Today by Tom Scott and the California Dreamers, which you may not recognize at first, but give it a listen, and I'm sure you'll remember it from somewhere. My words cannot do this episode or this sequence proper justice. It's fucking amazing, and I love it more and more every time I rewatch it. Oh, and there's this whole B-story plot about Huey brainwashing himself by doing a Super Size Me-esque science experiment, but instead of eating McDonald's, Huey's just watching nothing but black television for a month, which is a joke that would become much more prominent and also problematic in later seasons. Episode 13 is yet another banger.
Yeah, this one.
This
I love this
called
episode.
Wingman, and it's an
I love
episode
this
about
episode.
Granddad and Huey's past. Granddad finds
Gives a
out
lot
at
of
the
character
beginning of the episode that
backstory.
His former friend from another life, named Mo, recently passed, and the funeral is being held in the family's hometown of Chicago. With the promise that there will be something for him in Mo's will, Granddad takes the boys back to Chicago with him. This also gives Huey a chance to reconnect with his hometown best friend named Cairo. When they get back to their hometown, Granddad finds out that Mo lived a very extravagant life off of falsely claiming Granddad's accomplishments. This reminds Granddad of why he cut ties with Mo in the first place. Huey, on the other hand, comes back to find that Cairo was so upset with Huey leaving Chicago for Woodcrest that he replaced Huey with another, much cornier version of Huey. Huey and Cairo end up fighting at the funeral when things come to a head, but Granddad comes to the realization that even though Mo is an asshole, he was still his closest friend, and a lifetime without him has been a lifetime of loneliness. I think we all have that one friend that we know is a piece of but we still hang out with them anyway for reasons that we don't really understand. It can be easy to cut ties with that person when it's clear that they won't change, but it's also good to realize when certain petty things don't matter in the long run. They might annoy you here and there, but ultimately you're friends for a reason, and it's important to not lose sight of the joy that you bring into each other's lives. Huey, on the other hand, gets a much harsher lesson, and it's a lesson that people have tried to tell him all season. You can't save everyone, and you can't fix everything. Some people and some issues are beyond your control, and whether you're in the right or not, it doesn't really matter. Trying to make things better sometimes can only cause you more pain. It's a cold lesson for anyone to learn, but it's an absolutely necessary one.
You got knocked the... Never mind.
Episode 14 is a pretty great homage to the famous Spike Lee film Do the Right Thing. It's called The Block is Hot, and there's a running theme about the heat making people crazy throughout the entire episode. The quick rundown is this. To combat the heat wave going through Woodcrest, Huey's friend Jasmine does what many other suburban kids do during heat waves and decides to start up a lemonade stand to make some extra money. Unfortunately for her, Ed Wuncler Sr. happens to be in the neighborhood and decides to do what predatory rich white men do best and sabotage a minority's business from the inside while making tons of money for themselves and leaving said minority destitute in the end. Even though Huey tries to warn Jasmine about what will happen as soon as she agrees to do business with Ed Wuncler, Jasmine quickly becomes blinded by the empty promises that Ed Wuncler has given her and disregards Huey's warnings as the desperate cries of a miserable person who just wants everyone else to be as miserable as he is. I should point out that when Jasmine says this to Huey, it might be the only time we see Huey genuinely frown in the series. Like, he obviously never smiles, but he also doesn't really look sad outside of this moment either. And I haven't mentioned Jasmine much in this video, but she definitely plays an interesting role in the series to me. If Riley is Huey's foil, then Jasmine is Huey's, whatever literary term means, supportive confidant. Oftentimes, when others don't believe in Huey or don't listen to Huey, Jasmine is there to listen and support him during his crazy plans or conspiracy theories. When no one showed up to or stayed awake for Huey's Christmas play, Jasmine was there, clapping and cheering for him. When no one believed Huey that the White Shadow was real, Jasmine had no doubts that he was telling the truth as soon as he mentioned it to her. And when Huey got headbutted by his former friend Cairo, Jasmine was back in Woodcrest waiting to cheer him up. There are other examples throughout Season 1 and the entire series of Jasmine being there for Huey when no one else is, even if Huey doesn't seem to want her there sometimes. And though their relationship is one of the more understated aspects of the show, it's pretty touching whenever you see glimpses of how much they actually care about each other. Which is another reason why I love the ending of this episode, when after the utter chaos that breaks out in the climax, as soon as the snow starts to fall and Jasmine gets cold, despite her trying to push him away earlier, Huey instantly hands her his scarf because she's always been there for him, and he knows that he owes it to her to be there for her. And finally, we get to the Season 1 finale, The Passion of Reverend Ruckus. Full disclosure here, this is not just my favorite episode of the Boondocks, but my favorite episode of pretty much anything ever. And one of the reasons is that this episode heavily features one of the most controversial characters of the series, Mr. Uncle Ruckus.
No relation.
Times that Huey is the protagonist of the Boondocks, and if that's the case, then Ruckus is definitely the antagonist of the Boondocks. No matter where Huey, Riley, or Granddad go, no matter what they do, Ruckus is always there to verbally terrorize them with his toxic and hypocritical black white supremacist rhetoric. Uncle Ruckus is rarely, if ever, meant to be the voice of reason in the Boondocks. He's the only part of the main cast that is never shown in a positive light. He's a disgusting, abhorrent, and irredeemable human being, and holy shit do I love him for it. Ed and Rummy might be my favorite side characters, but Uncle Ruckus is the funniest character in the show, and it's not even close. Almost every line of dialogue
nobody touches Uncle Ruckus.
Is the most offensive, racist.
Probably Riley and Thugnificent,
so well, and what he says is so outrageous.
Uncle Ruckus
that I can't help
on a
but
whole
laugh with
other
my hand
playing
over my
field,
mouth
bro.
whenever I watch it.
Thank God for the white man's code of law. It's the only way to keep these crazy niggas under control. Well, that and pepper spray. The white man made a tragic misjudgment when he made it legal to teach niggas to read and write. Well, I'd expect a heathen niglet like Riley to say something like that. Just don't stay too long, darkies. Say that again. I couldn't hear you over the sound of me shitting myself.
The episode begins with Ruckus dreaming of Ronald Reagan, great callback to the first episode, taking Ruckus on a tour through white heaven and explaining that even a man as black as Ruckus can find salvation in white heaven if he teaches the world to hate blackness as white God demands. After this dream sequence, Ruckus finds out that he's dying and decides to spend his final days preaching to the world about hating blackness in order to find peace in white heaven. Sounds crazy, but crazier beliefs have found traction in the American zeitgeist before. And after some strategic political backing, Ruckus ends up becoming a national sensation, and his racist hate speech masked as religious epiphany becomes extremely popular. While this is happening, Huey is thinking of ways to get his imprisoned Black Panther friend who is currently on death row pardoned for his crimes, which he very clearly did not commit. Huey tries everything he can think of, even random anonymous blackmail to every governor in the country. Despite Huey's best efforts, it seems that nothing short of a miracle could get his friend cleared of his charges. So with no other option to turn to, Huey decides that he'll have to sneak into the prison himself and break his friend out, literally risking his own life and future to do the right thing. The only problem is that Huey is still a 10-year-old boy without a driver's license, and his granddad coincidentally needs the car the same night as Huey's prison break to stop Ruckus from spreading more hate speech on a national stage. Huey's grandiose and absurdly dangerous plan is foiled before it can even be started because he couldn't get a ride. At this point, Huey has felt an entire season's worth of futility, frustration, and helplessness. He's been unable to save his fellow black brothers and sisters, unable to save himself, and he's been unable to get people to listen to him or the problems of others. During a terrible thunderstorm that night, he sits at his usual hill above the neighborhood and reflects on his failures. And while doing this, he completely breaks down. He cries his eyes out as he realizes that there's only one thing left that he can do. He drops to his knees and he prays to a God he doesn't even believe in for help. He prays to God that just once in this twisted, biased, and fucked up world, that just once, things can turn out the right way. And just as he finishes his prayer, Ruckus cries out on stage amongst a scene of racial bedlam that he himself has created, that if he and his teachings are wrong, then let God strike him with lightning right now. The lightning strikes Ruckus directly in his tumor, clearing him of any terminal disease. The lightning strike also shuts off the electricity to the city, including the cell where Huey's friend was about to be executed in. At the same moment, an anonymous blackmail threat Huey sent to every governor reaches one of those governors' desks, and they make the call to free Huey's friend. Huey prayed for a miracle, and it finally came. But as Huey says at the end of the episode, we make our own miracles, and I couldn't agree more. In the show overall, Huey is the embodiment of reason, and Ruckus is the embodiment of insanity. So the dichotomy of the two plot lines showing Ruckus gradually rising to his highest level of influence, and Huey's voice and Huey's opinions gradually falling to their lowest point of relevance, was executed to near perfection here.
Yeah.
And both stories being brought together at the end with this miracle event that vindicates Huey while striking Ruckus back down to earth was pure genius. And that's why, in my opinion, this is the best ending to the best episode in the best season of the best show ever made. So that's the Boondocks, or season 1 of the Boondocks at least. A series truly unlike anything before or after. As I've said, it's my favorite show ever, and after this very long review, I hope you can kind of understand why. Watching the Boondocks for the first time when it aired all those years ago, and watching the Boondocks now as an adult, still feels the same. It's like looking at a reflection of myself and seeing things I've never been shown before.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all have your favorite show or movie or book or whatever that makes you feel a similar way. Something that allows you to escape reality and shows you a more interesting side of it. Something that lets you laugh at what would usually cause you pain. I hope you enjoy whatever piece of art that may be. Enjoy it like a dream you can always revisit. It's fun to dream, isn't it?
Alrighty, man. That's just gonna about do it for this one, man. Most definitely. This was a great breakdown. Hey, let's give him a round of applause, man. Let's give him a round of applause, man, for the one time. Let's give him a round of applause for the one time, man. This was definitely a dope-ass retrospective of the whole first season of Boondocks. Without a doubt, Boondocks is one of the most legendary black sitcoms. Well, I don't know if you call it a sitcom. I guess you could call it a sitcom, kinda, maybe, somewhat. Well, best black television show, period. Minus the 4th season. We don't talk about the 4th season. But yeah, man, that's just gonna about do it for this one. I will see you all in the next video. Tell what y'all think about Boondocks down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you till then. Peace out.